Hi everyone. So in the previous videos we talked a little bit about the Java language and a little bit about how we use different constructs within Java. Now, before we get started with actually doing any of that stuff, we should probably go over some of the basics. So a lot of this is going to be very familiar to you from doing things in other languages such as C++ or Python if you've ever worked in those. But we're going to go over them just so that we all have the same basic starting point. And I'm starting with essentially the same uh, program that you would start with, or I should say end with, in the lab one that we did earlier this week. Or maybe you haven't quite finished it yet, but it's the lab from this week. So we just have a class main here, and we have a public static void main. This is a main method. Your main method does always need to be public static void main. That is really important. And we do have that strings arg parameter in here as well. We have the system.out.println, and we're just printing out hello world. I know that you guys probably have changed it to print out your name or some other information, and we're just going to keep it as hello world because I'm actually going to be replacing this. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go over arrays. So when we're making an array in Java, we first start with the type that the array is going to be. So in this case, we're going to make an integer array, so that's just int. And the next thing you have to do is include open and close brackets. So as you can see here, I now have the start of an int array. I need to name it, and we're just going to go ahead and name it ARR for array. And on a new line, then we're going to do the next thing we need to do, which is actually allocate space for this array. Right now, I have said that I want an array. It's going to be an array. This variable is of this type of array, but we haven't actually made that array, which is part of what we were talking about before with needing to use that new operator. We're actually going to be using it here. So here we're going to put ARR, a variable name, and we're just going to say equals new, that new keyword, and it's going to just be int, and it's going to be a size. We're going to go with 10, our array of 10 integers, and this is essentially what declaring an array looks like. And at this point, if we run it, nothing is going to happen because I'm not printing anything out, but it will compile and it will work. Now, what we can do, instead of having these on two different lines, we can actually just make this one line, which works just as well. Just like I was talking about in the previous lecture slides, how we can do the same thing with our classes. Now, essentially here, an array is a class. Actually, everything in Java is a class. Even integers and doubles and your normal primitive types are classes. They're just covered with this veneer of essentially a primitive type. But don't worry about that. We'll get to that later and what those look like. But what that means is we still need to use this new operator. And again, that's this operator right here, the new operator, in order to declare our array object. Now, what we want to do next is we're just going to go ahead and do a system.out.println, and we're going to print out the array.length. So what this is here, so when I was talking about having that class dot syntax that I was talking about before, or that object name dot syntax I was talking about before, this is exactly what I was talking about. So our ARR is essentially an object. It is an array object, and we need to access its length. So we just go r.length, all right? Now when I run this, it's going to tell me that I have a 10 for my length. It's just going to print out 10. All right. Now, that's really cool. That's great. We have an array. How do we actually put stuff in it? Well, we put stuff in it very similarly to how we do that in other languages. So let's say that I wanted to put in at index 0, right? So I'm going to put in the value of 4. So in this case, I just type in ARR, the name of my array. I do an open bracket, the index value that I want to put in, and a closing bracket. And then I just say equals the value that I want it to equal. All right. So next, I want to set two indices to the same value. So I'm going to go ahead and say that I want to put the first indice and I want to put the second indice if I can actually type here, put the second indice to the same value, and I'm just going to say that it is 5. Now this is technically something we can do. It doesn't yell at me, it doesn't compile weirdly or anything like that. If I go to print this out, print line, if I go to print this out, you will see that they have the same value. So I printed out 10 for the length, and this time I'm going to just print out 5. And what's happened here is I didn't actually do print line here, and so it didn't do a new line, so we're just going to fix that real quick. So now we have 10, which is our length, and then we have our second indice printing out, which is 5. Now I can also make it so that different values can be entered in based off of the values of previous indices, right? Just like you would in any other programming language. So in this case, I'm setting the indice of the third position, well, I guess technically it's the fourth position in the array. So the indice at 3, so R open bracket 3 close bracket equals ARR of the second indice plus 2. All right, if I were to print that out, so if I do system.out.println and I do the array at indice 3, then we're going to see that we've got, after it compiles here, 10, 5, and 7, which is exactly what we would expect. Now, this is great and all, but perhaps, maybe, I don't want to go through and assign values like this. Maybe I want to assign values in a loop, using a loop, right? That would make sense. So let's go ahead and do that. So for, and then an open parenthesis, int I equals 0, I less than the array dot length, which we had already accessed before, and I plus plus, so that we iterate over that array one number at a time, right? This is a loop very similar to what you should have written in other programming languages. I do hope this is not your first programming language. It shouldn't be at this point in the program, but this should look very similar, very familiar to you. The structure is almost identical to loops that you would see in C or C++. So we're going to do this. We're going to do int I equals 0, I less than so while I is less than the array length, then we're going to also increase the value of I at the end of every iteration in this loop. So now I'm just going to go ahead and do, so every position within the array, I just want to set it to I. So every indice should have the same value in it as its indice value. All right. So what that means is that position 0 should have 0, 1 should have 1, 2 should have 2, and so forth. So now what we want to do, we want to print it out. So we're going to do another loop, and we're just going to do the same structure here. Int I equals 0, I less than the length, and then I plus plus. Now do remember to put your semicolons between your conditions here. So we have the value we're starting at, we have a semicolon, then we have the condition we're working toward, then we have a semicolon, and then we have the thing we do at the end of every iteration. So remember those semicolons, not putting those in, that's totally going to give you errors, and you're going to hate trying to look for those. So remember to put those semicolons in. All right, so now I want to print out. So again, that's system.out.println. And I'm just going to print out the array at every single indice. All right, so that's pretty straightforward. We're going to go ahead and run that. And what we should see here is the length, and then we should see 0 through 9, just like we would expect. So it looks like that worked correctly. You can see that down here. I know this is probably really small. I don't think I can increase I can't really increase the size without also increasing the size of the entire browser window. So just remember that I am going to post this code, so you'll be able to download it and run it on your own machine and see exactly how it works. Now the next thing I want to do is actually put in some conditionals here so that we're only printing out the value if the indice is even. So how would we do that? Well, we would do that using a modulus, which I hope you're familiar with. We're going to go over how we can use that here, but it allows us to identify when something is even pretty easily. So we're just going to say when the I modulus 2 is equal to 0. All right, now how this works is we do have a double equal sign here for the comparison. We have a I%2, which is that modulus, all right? And if you don't remember, a modulus is essentially, I want to get the remainder if I divided this value by this other number. So in this case, I want to get the remainder of I when I divide I by 2. And in particular, I want to check to see if that's 0, because if it's 0, that means there's no remainder and it's an even value. So if I modulus 2 is equal in value to 0, I want to print out the value of the array. All right? So if I, the indice, is even, we're going to print out the value of the array. And what we should see here is we should see 0, 2, 4, 6, and 8 printed out to the command line. Let's see if I did it right. All right, so we still see 10, which is the length, so that's fine. And then we have 0, 2, 4, 6, and 8. All right, so that's how we do loops. That's a little bit of how we interact with arrays. And that is also how we do command control structures such as if statements. Now, if you want to do an else, so let's say we wanted to do something else when it was an odd value, we can just add in an else statement here. So we have if and else, so we have the else after the closing bracket to the if, and we have another set of brackets after the else where we can put that code. So here, maybe we decide that we want to print out the value of it when it is odd, right? So maybe that's something we're interested in, but maybe instead of doing that, maybe we want to print out the value of it plus, maybe let's do times 2. So how is that going to look different? So we're going to have, if it's even, we're just going to print it out. If it's odd, if the indice is odd, we're going to multiply it by 2, which is completely arbitrary. This is entirely just to show you the control structure. This type of logic doesn't make much sense in an actual program, but you'll see what happens here. So I have 10, the length being printed out, and then I have 0 because it's even. Then I have 2 because that's 1 times 2, and then I have 2 because it's odd, or sorry, because it's even, so it's just being printed out. And then I have 6, which is 3 times 2, 4 because that indice is even, and then it continues on like this for some time, going through the entire loop for the math. All right, so if you have any more questions about arrays or loops or control structures in Java, I mean, they look very similar to what you should have seen before, but go ahead and shoot me a message on Microsoft Teams. Hopefully this gives you enough of an understanding so that you can actually start programming some basic things in Java. I do recommend that you use some of the resources that I posted in the external resources section on iLearn to practice your programming skills in Java. It's really important that you have a good grasp of Java programming skills because we're not going to cover the language itself that much. We're going to mostly talk about OOP in this course. So having a strong understanding of Java on its own is going to help you so you're not struggling with the language as much, and you're going to struggle more with the concepts or ideas like you should be, rather than struggling with being able to program it because you don't understand what Java is or how to use it. So there are some resources on iLearn in the external resources section. This includes a learnjavaonline.org. This includes Codecademy. And it also includes a website called CodingBat. I really recommend the CodingBat one because it's going to help not just your Java skills, but it's also going to help your overall programming skills. And it's going to help you think about problems in a more complete way. And it's also going to stretch your skills a little bit. It's a really good site, and I do recommend it. All right, so pay attention for future videos. So you do have videos being released Every single Tuesday and Thursday in this course, if you're enrolled with me for a lecture, we'll have content every Tuesday and Thursday released. It'll be much like it's been this week, where you get new videos. It's not going to be one big video. You're going to have smaller videos that you can watch. And they're going to be broken down a little bit more by more specific topics than they would be normally in class, if we did class in person, that is. And remember to pay attention for when your lab sections come up so that you get your synchronous online help as you need it. If you have any questions, again, please send me a message on Teams. I promise I don't bite. I love working with students. I love hearing your questions. I love getting your feedback on what's working and what isn't. I can't make things better if you don't tell me what you need. So make sure you tell me what you need so that I can make this course fit your needs and make sure that you guys get the education that you need. All right? So again, reach out to me on Teams. Let me know how things are going.